rail on it. It didn't have heavy rail. It really didn't get heavy rail until after the war, when they came in and had pulled up rail from other parts of the railroad. When they upgraded it, then they brought that used rail and replaced the rail here. And the same thing when the diesel locomotives came in, it caused the mallet engines, the Malleys, to be surplused. And they were enormous big engines. And then they came up on these lines. Well, they needed a heavier grade of track. They strengthened the bridges to run the Malleys until the whole railroad was diesel in the middle 50s.
Yeah, that's all I remember seeing running the railroad were the diesels.
Yeah. And
now, were they deadheading up at Durban? Did they go up to Durban and return?
Yeah, because the C&O ended at Durban and the Western Maryland started. And, well, you know, really the C&O ended at Thornwood.
Yeah.
But and they pulled a lot of coal up through here. And then, of course, the coal from Burgoo and Webster Springs came to the Western Maryland. Then the Western Maryland from Durban ran to Elkins.
Yeah.
And at Elkins, it went to Hagerstown, Maryland, and then from there it went to Shippensburg, Pennsylvania, where it met other railroads like the Pennsylvania and the Reading, and then that soft coal was taken up to the steel mills and cement plants and power plants in the northeast part of the United States, New England.
But would they have been pulling coal from on this section of the road?
If it did come here, it came up through Roncevert.
Yeah.
There wasn't a whole lot of coal along the C&O here. Originally, this branch was built to haul out lumber.
The logs, or the lumber, yeah.
But by 1926, 27, most of the sawmills were cut out. The virgin timber was gone. Most of the mills closed. The only one really that remained was Cass.
It makes me wonder why Cass lasted so long.
Well, for a couple of reasons. One is Cass owned an enormous amount of land. They owned 189,000 square acres. It was an enormous piece of property, and the primary product at Cass was flooring, and they cut they made three kinds of hardwood flooring, and the species they used to make hardwood flooring was fast growing, so they'd cut in one section, and then in 20 years it would be back where they could go back and harvest more. What really hurt them was when they brought in the skidders, the overhead skidders, and what the skidders did was it broke the tops out of the young trees.
And so they couldn't grow back.
So they couldn't grow back, yeah.
And those were a steam skidder, right?
Steam skidder, yeah, which when Maurer took over the West Virginia Pulp and Paper, and it became Maurer Lumber Company, he brought in new techniques that they used in Western logging. Now Maurer, he owned 9 lumber operations just like Cass, and Maurer was a genius at buying almost depleted lumber companies, and he bought them for pennies on the dollar. He bought the operation at Cass for pennies on the dollar, and he either liquidated them or he ran them and got the very last money out of them. He squeezed whatever he could out of them. He was a genius at salesmanship. He developed new markets for hardwood flooring that no one ever dreamed of. I read one time that one of his big markets was selling hardwood flooring in South America. Nobody thought about ever going to South America to sell flooring. What really killed Cass was wall-to-wall carpeting.
Yeah, and now we're moving away from carpeting.
In the late 50s, people stopped putting hardwood flooring in brand new homes. They were going to wall-to-wall carpeting, broad loom wall-to-wall carpeting, and nobody wanted it. When Cass closed, they had almost $3 million in inventory in hardwood flooring. They really couldn't give it away. At that time, the only people who were using it was bowling alleys and gym floors for new schools. And they weren't putting it in homes anymore. And Georgia Pacific came in and bought the company out, and it took them 2 years to liquidate everything that was in Cass. And the reason Maurer sold out was Maurer was killed. And I don't know if he was killed in a plane crash and his sons began fighting with each other, and they couldn't agree on anything, so they just got rid of everything.
Would he have been an old man?
No, I don't think he was that old. I think he might have been around 60 or 65 years old. He grew up in the lumber business. I read that his great uncle was Bob Hickman, and Bob Hickman ran the Pocahontas Supply Company, which was the company store in Cass. Which was one of the biggest stores in West Virginia. So Hickman must have had quite a connection to lumbering. He came from Virginia.
Well, now, did they use script at Cass?
No. There was some script. No. Cass was an above-board operation. Cass wanted to keep the best workers, and they wanted to keep them. They didn't want a turnover. They wanted a highly skilled workforce. Their houses were better than anybody's. Their company store was the best. And the other thing is they did trade with the whole community. You could go to the Cass Company store and buy a tractor. You could buy your seed, your fertilizer. They let farmers keep accounts there. They bought coal from the company. They bought hay, furniture, appliances. You could go to Cass and buy a vacuum cleaner or a washing machine or anything you want. Chickens. They actually had a poultry house where you went and bought your chickens. And you'd come back later in the day and they'd have them cleaned and ready to go. They had a meat store. They had groceries. They had a drugstore. They had a company that the doctor treated the community. Now
so there weren't. Would it be safe to say there weren't many labor disputes in this area?
I understand they had a union and they did have some labor problems, but they tried to work with. I'm not telling you that those men were overpaid.
Right.
I mean, but
there was a general good spirit.
Much better treatment of their employees than other lumber companies. And they also had, they mined their own coal. At one time, the operation was self-sufficient on coal. They had coal camps up on Cheat Mountain where they'd run a mine for a year or two. It wasn't a big operation, but they'd cut into a seam of coal and they'd load that coal up and bring it down to Cass. So when Cass sold you coal, it was generally their coal.
I didn't know that there was that took place up there on top.
Yeah, they had logging camps and they had coal camps. And well, they said that on any given day there was 1,000 men working up on the mountain, and usually about 1,000 draft horses.
That is hard to imagine, isn't it?
Yeah. And they you know, the trains ran all day. I mean, all day, all night.
Well, does Mauer have any presence at all in the county now?
I don't. They still own some land. I think
a snowshoe. Yeah, snowshoe.
Their office used to be in Arborville. There's a building right there past the community center on the highway. That was where the Mauer Lumber Company had their offices. But I don't know if I don't think they cut lumber anymore, but they do own a little real estate. I mean,